The secret of laughter lies in the laughing, not in the search for joy. It's a swallowing on the wind, it's innocence in a boy. Loo-doo-doo-doo-lay-do, loo-doo-doo-doo-lay. Joy will come to anyone whose heart has learned to fly. Loo-doo-doo-doo-lay-do, loo-doo-doo-doo-lay. Joy will come to anyone whose heart has learned to fly. Joy in the singing, not in the song sung, welcome but never crave. If you think that laughter lies in things, to things you'll be but a slave. Loo-doo-doo-doo-lay-do, loo-doo-doo-doo-lay. Joy will come to anyone whose heart has learned to fly. Loo-doo-doo-doo-lay-do, loo-doo-doo-doo-lay. Joy will come to anyone whose heart has learned to fly. Joy in the giving, not in the gaining, grasp but you never sing. You can win the world and still be poor, win peace and live like a king. Loo-doo-doo-doo-lay-do, loo-doo-doo-doo-lay. Joy will come to anyone whose heart has learned to fly. Loo-doo-doo-doo-lay-do, loo-doo-doo-doo-lay. Joy will come to anyone whose heart has learned to fly. Sing when the sun shines, sing when the rain falls, sing when your road seems strange. In a tempest seize the lightning flash and ride the winds of change. Loo-doo-doo-doo-lay-do, loo-doo-doo-doo-lay. Joy will come to anyone whose heart has learned to fly. Loo-doo-doo-doo-lay-do, loo-doo-doo-doo-lay. Joy will come to anyone whose heart has learned to fly. Loo-doo-doo-doo-lay-do, loo-doo-doo-doo-lay. Joy will come to anyone whose heart has learned to fly. Loo-doo-doo-doo-lay-do, loo-doo-doo-doo-lay. Joy will come to anyone whose heart has learned to fly.
So we're going to talk about Master's concept that environment is stronger than willpower. But listening to the beautiful singing and the very innocent song and the lilting melody, there was one time in America, there was a small convenience store, and it had a parking lot next to it in a city, and some low-life kind of gang members used to congregate around there. And the store owner tried to drive them away, and they just ignored him and wouldn't leave, and this went on for a long time. And then he came on a brilliant idea. He put a big speaker up and played classical music, and they couldn't stand it. So they all left and went somewhere else. So if you have trouble, I don't know, you're not going to have gang members out here, but if you have trouble, you can play that innocent music and people will run away from it. But it's actually one of the principles that we want to talk about this afternoon of environment being stronger than willpower. This was a very strong part of Master's teachings. And he said that we're like a little plant, and that plant is very delicate and it needs a fence around it until it grows up, and then once it becomes a big tree, then you can take the fence away and it doesn't matter. But in the beginning, you need that protection, and that protection is the close environment around you. And that close environment around you exists on different levels. It exists on a physical level, on a mental and emotional level, and of course on a spiritual level. Master didn't want the monks or the nuns to go out alone. He said, always take a spiritual bodyguard with you. And it wasn't, of course, that they needed physical protection, but they needed protection against the environment that they might be drawn into because they were young. Later on, Master didn't need a spiritual bodyguard to go with him. He used to, in fact, go to some of the places where there were a lot of bars and low vibrations, and he would walk up and down outside just sending prayers and sending vibrations to help lift those souls out of that delusion, out of that miasma that made them seek that. As we were saying this morning, everyone is seeking their happiness. And some people think that they can find happiness through the forgetfulness or the low vibrations of alcohol, and then they get caught because there's an actual physiological reaction that comes. And if you've done that a lot in past lives, been an alcoholic, some people in this life, one drink is enough and it reawakens that. And you say, oh, well, it's just bad genetics. But why genetics? Why did you get born into that particular gene pool, that particular way? It's because you're attracted on some level, or were in the past, to those vibrations. And now, in this life, if you want to get away from them, it's very important that you stay away from that vibration, because otherwise it will reawaken in us samskars. The mind is incredibly vast. Master, when he gave his explanation of the Bhagavad Gita, talked about the mind being like a whole kingdom, and the mental thoughts that we have are mental citizens. The emotions that we have are emotional citizens of that kingdom. And a kingdom will go in the direction of its ruler. And that's why in the Bhagavad Gita, he talked about Duryodhana being king material desire, because that was what was attractive to him. And remember, he had mythologically 100 brothers, and each one of those brothers, each name stood for a particular quality, and all of those qualities were under the rule of king material desire. So all of those qualities were downward pulling: lust and anger and greed and violence and negativity and so on. So all of those mental citizens, they banded together. And on the other side were, of course, the Pandavas, and those were the 5 brothers, and they've also banded together. And the 5 brothers represent the chakras. So Sahadev at the coccyx, Nakula, Arjuna, Bhima, Yudhishthira, and this chakra is Krishna. And so those are the inner citizens, the spiritual citizens. And when you tried to put those together, what happened? Duryodhana and his brothers tried to everything they could to kill them. They tried to poison them, they tried to burn them, they tried to get rid of them. Finally, they figured out, well, we'll take away their power by gambling. And that's a very, there are multiple meanings to that. First of all, it means that because Yudhishthira was bound by the cultural dictates of his day not to avoid that gambling game. And so he had to gamble. And people ask, well, why? Why did he gamble like that? Well, it's a deeper explanation. It's really what it represents is it's when we come out of childhood and go into puberty, and the emotions and the hormones and the thrust into adulthood, we don't have a choice about that. That's the way God set up the world, the physical world. And so we come into a body, and we come into that age period. And then what happened was the spiritual qualities, being the 5 brothers, lost that gambling. And they had to go into the forest and hide out for 12 years. And Master said that many, many people lose their spiritual tendencies during those teenage years. And then starting around maybe 23, 24, those spiritual tendencies begin to awaken again. And Devi and I and many, many others came to Ananda at about that time. And so it's just partly the way that the body is set up, partly a way that God has created this. But vibrationally, here I'm talking about, the spiritual element and the worldly element, are uneasy with each other. And especially the spiritual element, because especially in more elevated spiritual soul, they aren't necessarily uneasy with worldly people. It's not like they're afraid of them or they can't be around them. They just choose not to be. But if it's part of their work to do that, then that's what they do. When Mother Teresa, who we saw a movie with Swamiji on the life of Mother Teresa, and he said something very interesting when we left. He said there was one line in that movie that was the most important line of all. And he said, I'll bet that almost everybody missed it. And when he told us the line, we had missed it too. He said that the reporter, it was a movie with reporters and a documentary about Mother Teresa's life. The reporter asked her, why do you do this work? Why do you go into the slums? Why do you work with the poor, the unwanted, the poorest of the poor? And she didn't answer in the way that would typically be answered, because that's proper service or whatever. There are many, many answers. She gave a very simple answer, and this is what Swami pointed out to us. It's because Jesus told me to do that. Her guru is Jesus. Her guru told her that was her work, and that was what was going to free her. And so vibrationally, because if something comes from God and we're doing God's work, then the environment that we're put into doesn't affect us very much. One time we were with Swamiji, and we had to go in, this was in San Francisco, and we had to go into, well, we didn't have to go into. I'll give the longer version of the story. It was when we were establishing the first large city center, the first large ashram in San Francisco. And Devi and I were about to be in charge of it. And during the first 2 or 3 months, Swamiji had been there with us, giving satsangs and teaching and helping develop the interest. And then he was going to be going back to Ananda village. And Devi and I were going to be left there in charge of the ashram. We had some trepidations because we'd been living for a long time in the Ananda village, and here we were to be in San Francisco, which can be quite a worldly city. And so the night before he left, he said, well, let's go out and do something together. And he looked, and there was a movie playing. He liked old movies and high-minded movies, and this was the movie Pride and Prejudice, made in the 1930s or 1940s. And that was playing at kind of an art theater. And so he said, well, let's go watch that movie together. And so we went, and it started at 9:30 or something like that at night. And we didn't notice too much as we went in. But when we came out of that movie theater, we saw that it was in a very low-life district of San Francisco. And there were, people doing drugs and kind of just, it was very, very bad vibrations. But it was as if Swami was the prow of a ship, and he was just leading us through that, and we all walked in his wake. What he was really doing was he was teaching us that if you keep your mind in God, those vibrations can't affect you. They can't pull you down. One time before, I had gone with him to, he was trying to, one of his first, in fact, his very first album of his songs, he wanted them to be distributed more widely. And so he heard that there was a man who might be interested in helping him find distribution for it. And so he had an appointment and went to meet this man. Well, it was in the nightclub district of San Francisco. Again, very low vibrations. But as we got out of the car, this, of course, he knew, because you can't miss it with all the signs and so on. As he got out of the car, he just started chanting, Shri Ram, Jai Ram, Jai Jai Ram Om, Sri Ram O Jai Ram, Jai Jai Ram Om. And we chanted that the whole time. And honestly, when we left, the man in such a district was not interested in Swami's songs. Luru, luru, leru, luru. Not exactly the nightclub kind of song. But honestly, when we left there, we were more uplifted than when we went in. Now, that isn't usual. Usually, vibrationally, the environment pulls us into its particular kind of aura. Now, why is that? Master said that this morning we talked about how we've come in now to the age of energy. But Master said that the next law, well, he said, as we all know who practice Kriya, one of the things that he taught was the stronger the flow of energy, the stronger the will, the stronger the flow of energy. That's why we do the muscle tensing and relaxation with strong will, because that sends a strong flow of energy and helps us feel it and bring it under our control. So the stronger the will, that means our choice, because we have free will and we're choosing to send energy in a certain direction. The stronger that flow is, the stronger the will, the stronger the flow of energy. But the next law that relates to that is that the stronger the flow of energy, the stronger the magnetism. If you have a wire and you send electricity through that wire, around that wire is a pattern of magnetism, a magnetic field. That's how electromagnets work. And so that electromagnetism is partly a law of nature. And Master talked about how the world is made up completely of magnetism. And he talked about each chakra is magnetically a pole with the chakra above and the chakra below. And so our whole body is magnetic. Our left side is a negative polarity, not that it's bad. Right side is a positive polarity. Top of the head is positive polarity, base of the spine, negative polarity. And all of the way that we're built is with the law of magnetism. And I saw one time a video on YouTube. Somebody sent me the link. Otherwise, I don't poke around a lot on YouTube, but someone sent this link and it was very interesting. Someone had a camera in which the camera was able to see the aura of magnetism, the magnetic lines. And first it showed, a electromagnet, and there were thousands and thousands of little lines, like light lines around that. But then it also showed the person who was doing the experiment, and there were lots of lines that came out from him. And as he walked down the hall, you could see these lines kind of changing and mutating and getting bigger or smaller. And So we are walking magnets. And it isn't just that the magnetism is physical, it has to do with our thoughts. You know, if you had a basket of nails and they all looked alike because they were made the same and, let's say, painted, but half of those nails were steel and half of those nails were aluminum, and you had to pick out which one was which. It would be very hard to do that in a physical sense. If someone had gone to pains to make them look identical, yes, you could weigh them or something like that. But the easiest way is to come with a magnet, put it over the basket, and it attracts all the steel ones. And then you set that aside, and very quickly you would separate those two. Well, we're walking magnets. And the world around us is attracting us or repelling us. And that's why, to a certain extent, we're attracted to people who vibrate on the same level. One of the laws of magnetism is that like attracts like. And like-minded people attract like-minded other people. So when Devi and I come into even something like an airplane, you know, where there are heterogeneous vibrations, it could be, we always seem to sit next to somebody that's spiritual or get involved with somebody that's spiritual. Devi especially. She has a magnetism, as you've already seen. I'm being serious now. I'm not joking with her. She has a magnetism of a great deal of compassion and heart quality and love. And when she stands in a line at the grocery store, people will come up to her and start talking about their life, their difficulties, simply because they're drawn by that magnetism. I, on the other hand, they don't do that for me. But I have a magnetism of calmness and centeredness. And if I come into a room where there's argument or discussion, it stops. And this isn't now just because I'm one of the elders at Ananda. It was always true. I would come into a room and the arguments would just calm down, because that's my particular magnetism. Well, what's the magnetism of our spiritual path? Master said that it's all, if you go back this morning, I said that Adi Shankara defined God as Sat Chidanandam. But Master also talked about the ways, we could call them the vibration or the light spectrum, by which God expresses into the world. And there are 8 of them, the 8 vibrations of God. And there's love, joy, calmness, wisdom, power, light, sound, and what am I? Peace. Thank you. And so those are distinct vibrations. One could call them like distinct magnetisms. Here I've used the example of the fact that you take a magnet and you pick up all the steel. But let's say that there are other kinds of physical magnetism. So you have a mixed bag or a mixed basket, and you can bring a magnetism of peace, and that attracts all those little nails that seem, all the people who outwardly you don't necessarily see a great deal of difference, but a peaceful person will attract the peaceful people to him, and so on. So now we come to the subject of the discourse, which is that environment is stronger than willpower. So think of environment not as just this person and that person, this personality and that kind of job, but rather a whole arena of mixed vibrations and magnetism. And when we come in to a mixed group of people, we will be attracted and affected by their magnetism, and we ourselves will affect them. And Master said that a person of strong positive magnetism will begin to change people of negative magnetism. But a person of strong negative magnetism will also begin to change people of strong positive magnetism. And so all of us are trying to develop positive qualities. We're trying to develop those 8 qualities of God. And so if we can think not of ourselves as just being a person with a personality and a name and a place that we live and all those outer definitions, but rather we can think of ourselves as a source of magnetism. Then if you want to be able to affect the world in a positive way, then vibrate with one of those qualities of God. Devi vibrates with the quality of love. And that is expressed, love gets expressed in many different ways. It gets expressed as kindness, compassion, friendship. Swami also was incredibly powerful in expressing the vibration of love. People who hardly connected with him, only a few times, they would say, "Oh yes, Swami is my best friend." Why? I mean, it wasn't an outward connection, but it was an inner bond, and it was that inner magnetism. Master said that he especially expressed 3 of the qualities of the 8. He said he expressed love, he expressed joy, and he expressed wisdom. And observing the life of Swamiji, he has expressed the same kind of vibrations: love, joy, and wisdom. And it's so clear when, some people are kind of weak magnets, and you aren't quite sure what they're expressing. But Swami was a powerful, powerful magnet. And so when he expressed wisdom, he wrote 150 books. And when he expressed joy, he wrote Lura Lura Leru, Lura Lura Lai. And when he expressed love, it was kindness and compassion that people could physically feel. One time we were in Los Angeles, and we were walking down a street. We'd walk down, he used to like to walk down places that had little shops. And he would enjoy not just buying things. It wasn't for that. It was just interesting to him. And we had walked down about 4 blocks on one side of the street, and then we turned and we were walking back to the other, back to the car. And at one point we saw this little shop that had very pretty little things in the window. And so Swami, and there were about 4 others of us that were with him, he went into this shop. And the woman said, "Oh, I was hoping you would come into my shop." And she didn't know Swami or know us. And Swami said, "Well, why?" She said, "I was watching you walk down the other side of the street, and it was as if there was a light around you, and everyone that you touched lit up in your presence. I was hoping you would come in to my shop." And there was an instant friendship. And any time we were there, he would always go into that shop. And she happened to speak Italian, and he enjoyed speaking Italian with her. But that's on the surface level. It was the magnetism. It was that exchange of magnetism. Now, he was a very, very powerful expression of magnetism. How do you get to be a powerful expression of magnetism? I was talking about the electromagnetic field that's around, magnetic field around an electromagnet. And you can make very powerful electromagnets and they're very common. They're in all the motors and everything. Anyway, you make them by wrapping generally copper wire in many, many rounds around something. And then when a magnet, stationary magnet inside, rotates, it creates this field and it generates power. And so, but if you try to send too much electricity through those copper wires, it'll burn them up. And so most of us, and why is that? On a physical level, it's because there are impurities in the copper. And so the flow of a lot of electricities, which is the flow of electrons, the flow of a lot of electricity heats it up, and if it's too much power, it burns it up. But there's another kind of material called a superconductor. And on a physical plane, generally, it has to be reduced to a very low temperature. But with a superconductor, you can send enormous flows of energy through because it doesn't heat up. It doesn't resist that flow of energy. The avatars are superconductors. The great saints are superconductors. So an enormous flow of energy can flow through them. But again, it's not just physical. Here it's a physical example, but enormous joy can flow through them. And people will feel joyful in their presence. Enormous wisdom can flow through. And people will feel uplifted and their minds clear in their presence. What does that look like outwardly? It looks like somebody going and having a whole lot of questions. I'm going to ask Swami, and I'm going to get the answers to all of these questions. And they go in and they sit with Swamiji for about 3 minutes, and pretty soon they've forgotten all of their questions, and they're just sitting there enjoying everything. Their mind seems clear, their heart is open because of the love, they're joyful, and then they forget their questions, they leave, and 20 minutes later they say, "Oh, darn, I forgot to ask my question." And they're a little upset, but it's because of the upliftment of magnetism. Now, it happens also on a physical plane. Physically, there's an exchange of magnetism also. One time we were visited by Chidananda, the great, he's really a saint. He passed away a few years ago, but he was Swami Shivananda's of Rishikesh, his disciple who took over the ashram after that. He came and visited Ananda, and we were taking him on a tour of the gardens. And at one point, he looked, and there was a little can that was used when they transplanted the plants. They would get water in that and pour it in around the roots. But it was kind of rusty, and it was just there. And he said, "Why is that there?" And one of the people explained what it was used for. He said, "If you use it in that way, take it and clean it up and paint it, and then have a special place for it. Because when things are old and discarded and dirty like that, they attract lower astral beings." And so all around us, there are these unseen magnetisms. Remember the YouTube video? Nobody can see that flow with their physical eyes, but if you had sensitive enough eyes, this is the sensitive enough eye of intuition, then you would see that hidden magnetism. One time, Master was in some gathering, and there was a woman who had a baby, and she handed him the baby, and Master handed it back quite quickly. And then later, he told one of the disciples, "I almost dropped that baby because that baby was a murderer in its last life." And he could feel that, the past lives and the magnetism. So all around us. So that's why it's important in your own physical environment to keep it clean, keep it orderly, have uplifting colors. Does that mean that some colors are good colors and other colors are bad colors? Yes and no. All of the colors of the rainbow, it's not like red is a bad color. You know, they say that red represents anger and green represents jealousy. Oh, that isn't really true. It's just things that people ascribe to it. Why does red represent anger? because when we're angry, the emotions and the physical nerves heat up. And so someone can feel that, you get hot. That's why your cheeks get flushed and you get hot when you're angry. And so they say red is angry. It represents anger. Well, it's the other way around. When you're angry, you heat up. So, but all of the pure colors are lovely. One of the reasons that Devi and I love India, just on a physical level, is we see such beautiful clothing. Even the poorest people will be wearing a beautiful color. And it's very nice. Swami used to be on a little bit of a campaign in Italy, because in Italy they love style and they love form, but their colors are almost always muted, and usually for men it's brown or black. The women are allowed a little wider range. But Swami was always on a campaign, used bright colors. One of the reasons that we wear blue is because of the vibration of that color. Anyway, I'm getting off my subject here. I don't want to be like a politician up on a soapbox here. But everything has vibration to it, and we need to respect that vibration. And that's why when we go places, we need to understand that we're going into kind of a sea or a forest, a jungle of different vibrations. And if we're very powerful, it doesn't matter what kind of animals dwell in that jungle. If you're powerful like an elephant, the fact that a tiger might be living in that part of the jungle doesn't matter. But if you're a weak little man and you go out at night, the fact that a tiger is roaming there can be very dangerous. And so the jungle of life has a lot of human tigers and lions and vipers and cobras. It's full of them. So one thing is to recognize that and give it its due. Don't go into places that will pull your energy down. And especially if you have any particular kind of weakness, don't go into that environment until you've completely overcome that weakness. Let's say that you used to smoke and you have now given up smoking. Don't go into an environment where people smoke, or you'll be attracted back into that habit pattern. I myself used to smoke when I was growing up and in college. I quit smoking the day that I went to work for Swami. I knew I couldn't smoke while I was in Swami's presence, so I gave it up. And it was a difficult first couple of weeks. But it was interesting, Swamiji would not allow me to talk about it. A couple of times I tried to tell him, Swami, I had been a smoker, and he just changed the subject. And then after about a month or so, when any temptation to smoke had passed, then he said, I noticed you gave up smoking, and I'm very proud of you for doing that. But he didn't want the mind to be drawn into the mental thoughts of smoking, even to talk about, I didn't smoke, or I used to smoke and now I don't, So all of those vibrations are there. So be careful about what vibration you go into. Now, to come to the heart of the matter, here we are, all of us, wanting to be uplifted and wanting to express a deeper aspect of our spiritual life. And so what we need to do, especially when we're newer on the spiritual life, is we need to surround ourselves, like that little sapling, with a fence. And that fence could be a spiritual community. It could be a sangha. It could be satsang. It could be listening in the car to lectures of Swamiji or to music that's uplifting. But so you build a fence of vibration around you, and by having that environment, it keeps your mind uplifted. then later on, when you're a powerful oak, not only can you go into other environments, but sometimes the guru will tell you, go serve the poorest of the poor. Master had a disciple who used to be his driver, and he told her to go to cocktail parties. She said, "Oh, Master, I don't want to drink." He said, "Don't drink. Just get some water and put it in a cocktail glass and put an olive in it. They'll think you're drinking a martini." But he said, go and talk to people there about the spiritual path, because I don't know why exactly, these stories are very interesting, and they're good for meditation. But I'm looking here. I've overstayed my welcome here a bit. But anyway, surround yourself with the vibration and the magnetism of that which is going in the direction of your own chosen aspirations. And if you do that, your environment will reinforce your uplifted desires. And be careful about going into environments that pull you down against your will into lower vibrations. Because as we know from the Bhagavad Gita, that war is a terrible war that we have to fight. And we're going to need all of the mental soldiers that we can get to gather around on our side to help us fight that war. And you don't need to hang out with the enemy.
Well, I thought I would start sharing this afternoon by sharing with you a story which you probably already all know, but like most good stories, they're worth retelling. And it's from Autobiography of a Yogi. And it's one of the curious ones, the chapter, The Great Cauliflower Robbery. And, that autobiography is such a rich book. For most of us who have been disciples of Yoganandaji for many years, we've read it many, many times. But the curious thing is, every time I read it, it's a different book. I'll get to a part and I thought, that wasn't in there before. How did that get in there? And it's just because you can only absorb as much as you're ready to tune into at the time. And as you mature spiritually, you can go deeper with it. I'm going to back up a little bit. We were in Los Angeles recently at our new ashram there, and we were talking with the people who live in the ashram. And I asked one young person, how did you find Yoganandaji's teachings? And it was a wonderful story. He said, well, someone gave me a copy of Autobiography of a Yogi. And I looked at the picture on the cover, and I didn't like it at all. And I thought, I don't want to read this book. I don't like that picture, that man's face. And he just put it down. It happens. And then some months later, he was going to be moving from the house that he was living in, and he had something stored up in the attic of that house. So he went up there and he was looking for his things, but someone had left a box of books in that attic. And he just looked at the box, and on the very top of the box of books, there was a book, but the cover was torn off. And so he said, I wonder what that book is. And so he picked it up and he started reading it, and he loved it. He couldn't put it down. And then he got to a certain point, and there was Master's picture. And it was so Master saying, you don't like the cover? I'll tear off the cover. Here it is for you. But that book is a living reality, and it will constantly speak to us in the most amazing ways, prophetically, truly, if you use it as a channel for divine consciousness to come to you. But the Great Cauliflower Robbery, when I first saw that chapter, I thought, what in the world could this be about? But Master tells the story how he was finishing up his year of college, and he had lovingly grown these 3 big cauliflowers for his guru, and he brought them to the ashram, and he gave them to Sri Yukteswar, I believe it was in Puri, his seaside ashram, and Sri Yukteswar said to Master, oh, we're going to have a big feast tonight, and we'll cook your cauliflowers. And then he said, now we're going, he said, put them away. And so Master hid them under his bed. And he said, we're going to march down with all the little ashram boys. We'll go down to the seaside, to the ocean. So they were marching along, and Master Sri Yukteswar had them all lined up, and they were singing that song, Boys Go To and Fro in a Pretty Little Row. Swami wrote a melody to it, very innocent melody as he does. But then Sri Yukteswar stopped, and he said, Mukunda, did you lock the back door of the ashram? Sang to Swami, to Master. And Master tended to be a little, one could say, absent-minded, but when your mind is with God, it's absent of any ego principle. And he said, I think so, Master. Guruji said to his guru, I think so, Master. And Sri Yukteswar said, I don't think so. And he said, you were forgetful of your duties. And let that be a lesson to some of the young monks here. You were forgetful of your duties, and so you will be punished. And he said, this man coming down the road, he will be the instrument for your punishment. And Master looked down the road, and there was this crazy man dancing in the road, just flailing his arms and doing a strange dance. And then all of a sudden, and he passed the ashram, and he stopped, he turned around, he ran into the back door of the ashram and came out. And then I love this line. Master says, now imbued with the dignity of possession, he was carrying one of Master's cauliflowers. And now he was very dignified, holding the cauliflower. And I often think of that line when I'm walking past a shopping mall and you see all the people with their bags, and imbued with the dignity of possession, I have something from whatever it is, the big names that people shop at those stores. And so now he had dignity. And so that's a strange enough story. But then, so Master ran back into his room. Sure enough, he had forgotten to lock the back door of the ashram. But on his bed, he had left his gold watch, his bangle, his money. And the crazy man wasn't interested in any of that. He just had gotten under the bed one of the cauliflowers and walked off. But then Master wrote, and this is, you may wonder, what is this crazy lady talking about cauliflowers this afternoon? But then Master wrote, thoughts are not individually, but universally rooted. And Sri Yukteswar said, I put the thought in that weakened mind of that man who was a little crazy, that there were cauliflowers, and I put the hankering for a cauliflower in his thought, and he went and got them. And so this is the point. Thoughts are not individually, but universally rooted. And then Master goes on to say, the human consciousness is much more like a receiving station of a radio than a sending station. So we are receiving all the time thoughts, good thoughts, bad thoughts, happy thoughts, sad thoughts, inspiring thoughts, depressing thoughts. All the time we're receiving them. And depending on the quality of our magnetism, the ones that we draw to us and take root in our consciousness affect our behavior. So if we tend to be a basically positive person, then we have our state, just like a radio dial. We're tuned in to radio station JOY, and we are getting positive, uplifting thoughts no matter what. We were talking with someone earlier this morning after the class who was asking, how can you use yoga and meditation to improve your life? Well, people may perhaps erroneously think, well, you live in an ashram, everything goes beautifully, and it's as long as we're burning up karma, things will not go beautifully. But at Ananda Village, most of you know, many of you, that we had a big fire, a forest fire came after 7 years into the community, and it was burnt to the ground. Every home, every temple, every building, it was all gone. And yet the miracle of that experience was because we all had been practicing meditation. We all had been tuning in to a thought form that represented positive thinking, solutions, courage, ability to deal with whatever came. We watched everything we had be taken away, and we said, it's all right. We'll just rebuild. I remember saying to Jyotish, where do we rebuild the new community? Because it was nothing but ashes. And he said, what do you mean? We'll build it right here. And I looked around and I thought, well, I don't know how this is possible, but if you say so, I'll go along with it. But then Swami had been away the day of the fire. And he came back. He'd been in seclusion writing his autobiography. He came back and he put out the mental thought, such calmness, such centeredness. And he met with the whole community. And it was not for, honestly, I have to say, not for a moment were we discouraged. We wondered, why did this have to happen? This is changing our plans, certainly. But it didn't set us back. And that was living that reality, drawing from those thought forms that were so positive. And so when we talk about environment, and this is, you may wonder how it all ties together, but it does by a thin thread. The environment is, I want to talk about 3 environments that are very influential. The thought of the guru, the people we associate with, Sangha, and then the community, which, and by that I mean the field of energy of service together. And the thought of the guru, if we choose, is the most powerful transforming environment at all, because we can always choose to be in that vibration, no matter what happens. Just as Jyotish was saying about walking down the street in a very bad neighborhood, and Swami, we tuned in with the thought of the guru, and it didn't touch us at all. But I remember, and this is a rather personal story, but you know, we're all adjusting to Swamiji's loss of his physical body in different ways. Certainly, many people, and it's been our experience as well, have felt his presence even more. But when we were flying back from Italy after we went for his memorial services, I got on the plane, and you know, we've been vegetarians and not drinking alcohol for many, many years, and never thought about it. But I got on the airplane, and it was the strangest thing. The waitress or the hostess was coming along, and she was saying, do you want cocktails? Do you want cocktails? Do you want, vegetarian or non-vegetarian? And for one moment, I thought, oh, I don't ever remember making that choice, but somehow that choice was made. And I realized when I came to Ananda Ashram and to Swamiji, all of a sudden, I was meditating several hours, morning and evening, never eating meat again, never drinking alcohol again. These weren't big parts of my life, but a little social environment was such that there was a little. But I realized in that little moment where when was that decision made that I would be on the spiritual path? I realized it was the thought form of Swamiji, that we had the good karma to be with him, but just by being in his presence, all those habits were there. And it was like, I saw it in that moment, that I had taken it for granted, that, oh yeah, okay, well, I meditate morning and evening, and this is my life, and I'm serving God, but I never appreciated that it was a gift from the Guru's consciousness to help me to develop those right habits, to help me to change, to direct my life in such a way that I would grow closer to God. And so we need to realize that the environment of the Guru's consciousness it says in the scriptures, in all the 3 worlds, the greatest blessing is to find a true Guru, a Satguru. And why is that? Is it just so you have a picture on your altar? No. It's because they're working with your thoughts. They're working with your karma. They're working with your samskars to redirect them so that you never, you keep moving forward. There's one of my favorite little expressions that Swamiji had, because he loved people. He loved to have them around. He'd have people for tea and meals and so forth. But when it wasn't just social with him. It was always uplifting others' consciousness. And he would have this certain expression when the energy shifted, and he would say, "Well, everybody," and that meant time to go, time to go. Because he was feeling, I've upheld your energy now, and now the satsang's over. But it took, in retrospect, I see these things. And as they were happening, I wasn't so aware of them. But the environment of the Guru's consciousness is stronger than any adverse factor in your life, any bad karma that you may have. Believe this because it's true and it can transform your life. The protection and the vibration of a great master, you will see it in not only your own life, I have seen it in the life of loved ones and family members. I remember when I was blessed with a very holy and wonderful mother. But she didn't understand this path that I was on. She just it wasn't familiar to her. But she died some years ago, but in the last days of her life, she was dying. We were with her in the hospital, and she began singing. And I said, "Mother, what are you singing?" She said, "Don't you hear that music? It's so beautiful. I just hear this beautiful music." And she died in a very high state of upliftment, and I know that was Master's grace and Swami's blessings. When she finally met Swamiji, she came in. It was the sweetest thing. He took her hands, and he just looked at her, and she looked at him, and she just said, "It's been a long time." And again, it took me a while to understand. And what she was saying was, "You took my daughter and you raised her. I raised her in one way, but then you raised her in the more meaningful way as her soul development. And now we finally meet." And it was a very beautiful moment. But the environment of the Guru's thoughts is our greatest protection against any adverse karma, any adverse circumstances. And then the Sangha, our Guru Bhais, how they help us. How I can't tell you over the years the strength and the insight that I have gotten from the environment of being with high-minded people. In difficult times, again, I remember once when I had received some very bad news about the situation that had happened, and I went into our dining area. It happened to be a Thursday morning, and in that time we were practiced silence on Thursdays. And so I couldn't tell anybody, I'd gotten this very bad news about the situation, another situation. But I just walked in, and everyone had come out of the temple where they had been meditating. They were taking their meal, totally in silence, so peaceful, so uplifted. And I just sat there for a moment. I didn't have to talk. I didn't have to say to anybody, "Oh, what happened, and poor you," and I just felt their vibration, their thought form, that thought form of peace and God contact, and that was all I needed. And all the problems just said, I can deal with this. It's no problem. And so to create that environment, and that Sangha is precious. Don't take it for granted. When you're with your Guru Bhais, don't let your conversation come down to worldly topics or criticism or gossip. If you do, it's like a bubble that's burst and it's gone. But if you keep, Jyotish and I in our life together, we try not to speak negatively of others or gossip, or if someone's having a bad time or has done something improperly, we just don't talk about it. Because just as Swami didn't want Master Jyotish to be talking about smoking, if you keep your home environment, with your partner, with your family, with your friends, with your Sangha, just keep it focused in a positive, harmonious way. Doesn't mean that you're naive, doesn't mean that you're foolish. No. In fact, there was one circumstance, it was very interesting. One of our leaders of one of our communities, because when you're building a work, Swami always gave everyone opportunities. And there was one man that it went to his head. And he was sort of like, well, I'm the leader of this ashram, and I'm important. And he was like, and he was just like on a power trip, you could say. He was bossing everybody around. And that's not Ananda's way. Ananda is, from Swami's leadership, the leader is the servant of all, not the telling others what to do. And so we went to visit this ashram, and as soon as we got there, can we talk to you? Can we talk to you? Can we? And so everyone was pulling us aside and telling us what this leader had done and what he had said and how he had humiliated them. And we thought, oh, this is terrible. This is terrible. We have to come and tell Swamiji. So we came back from the trip, and Swami said, how did things go in the ashram? And we started to say, well, Swami, and he said, I don't want to hear about it. We didn't get one word out of our mouths, so we didn't know what else to say, so we changed the subject. But then it wasn't that Swami ignored it, but he worked with it in his own way, and then the time came and he replaced that person. But it's just the thought of keeping in the Sangha, in the fellowship of Guru Bhais. It's a sacred thing. Truly it is. And even in our conversations at meals, don't talk about worldly things. Don't talk about worldly music or the Beatles or whatever it might be. Keep your conversation uplifted. And then you magnetically draw your strength in your environment. And then finally, the environment. We'll talk more about this tomorrow, the importance of spiritual communities in the world today. But in our service together, we were here last February, and I can't tell you how pleased we are to see all the service that has been done here, the upliftment, the sattvic nature, and the new, we haven't seen it yet, but we are much looking forward to see the new Pune City Center and the new dining area and the gardens and everything. You can feel the service and energy that has gone in to transforming this place truly from a little rural, remote place into a spiritual ashram. How does that happen? Is it building buildings? Is it putting up spiritual pictures? No. It's tapasya, it's meditation, and it's joined service together. That's what builds a spiritual environment. And you all are doing that so beautifully, and I encourage you, keep doing it. And those of you who aren't living nearby here, in your home environment, Ananda has meditation centers in many areas. Go there and find ways to serve. Swami would always give people things to do, because as we serve God, as we serve the Guru, that energy flows, divine energy flows through us. And the beautiful energy, don't think she's here because she's probably serving, but Lakshmi in the kitchen, it's transforming the life here, because that service is done with devotion, with service to God. And this is, if we are in that flow, nothing can touch us. When Jyotish mentioned we went to San Francisco, and we were there for, I think, about 3 years. We were teaching classes, started a teaching center. We went out and did programs and so forth, and different things to spread Master's teachings. And a friend of ours came to visit us from Ananda Village, and she said, how can you stand living in San Francisco? And honestly, I said, I really haven't noticed, because we were focused on serving. And that's why, you hear about in battlefields true stories of like the medical officers, the medics, going in the middle of a battlefield where the bullets are flying to rescue wounded soldiers, and they're not hurt. Why is that? Because they're protected by service. And so the environment of giving a flow of energy out into the world. So I'll just end with these thoughts. These are 3 environments that protect you, uplift you, and change your life. The thought of the Guru, that universal blessing of our great Master, the blessedness of Guru Bhais. I know I could not get by without my divine friends in God, and that includes all of you. And then service, being in an environment where you can give and whatever. I remember once, I may have shared this story, but in the early years of Ananda, I was working at our retreat center, just like you all are. And it was very rustic as it is here, and we had some bedding for guests. And one time we were having a big program, and lots of people were coming, and we were getting them settled in their rooms, and we gave away, and then guests were coming, and we had run out of space, and so we found little places for them and found little beds for them. And then finally, I was still in the office. It was late at night, and one man came who hadn't registered, and we had no room, we had no bedding, we had no place to put him, but he'd come, and it was night. And so I said, oh, there's one room left, and I just gave him my room, and I just went into the kitchen. And then I saw Swami the next morning, and he, I didn't say anything to him about what had happened. And he looked at me and he said, now you're getting the idea. And he knew that I had given everything I had that night, as far as giving up my room. But when you're in that environment, you feel so much joy. So serve, give, let God flow through your heart to others. And then whatever happens around you, you just know, as Anandamoy Ma said, you carry your portable paradise with you in your heart, and nothing can touch you. So God bless you all.
Pomi has brought up a question that is very, very widespread. Many people don't have a choice about the environment that they go into. They have to go into a commercial environment, and it is a little bit unpleasant, or even maybe spiritually dangerous, or whatever you would want to say. Well, the more you can keep your own vibration strong, the less that will be affected, and the more that you will affect the people around you. I'll tell you 2 stories. We had a nurse at Ananda who had been with Ananda for some years, but she continued to work as a nurse. And at lunchtime, she would always go into her car, because there wasn't a place in the hospital where she worked. She would go to her car, and she would sit and she would meditate for 15 or 20 minutes before she took her food. And over a period of time, people started to recognize that there was something very special about her. And they would come to her with difficulties, or they would draw strength from her. And it was really because of the quality of holding on to that vibration of meditation. And so Master said that we should be like spiritual alcoholics. We take a little bit of wine in the morning. Wine of the mystic is uplifted consciousness and joy. And we take that wine in the morning, and then we take a little sip of wine all day long, and we keep our spiritual alcoholism going that way. But it's very different from worldly alcoholism. And so by these means, the other thing is pick out 1 or 2 people in your environment that resonate with, and especially have a connection with them. We had a man at Ananda in the early years. In fact, many of you know Leela because she was Swamiji's cook. Her husband, and he worked in a high-tech industry. And so
And he was like Kriyaban, a great devotee.
Yeah, a great devotee, very quiet, but a wonderful soul. And in this high-tech industry, he had one friend, and they always had lunch together. We didn't know it, but later on, we met this friend, this man who was his friend, and we were having dinner, and he said, "Do you know someone named David Hogendijk?" And we said, "Oh, yes, he was a wonderful man." He said, "He was my closest friend. At work, every lunch, we would go together." And he said David was very pulled back, and he said, "But I was one of the people who could make him laugh." But they just shared joy together. And so if you have to go into a worldly environment, find a few friends that can become a little picket fence around you. And there's an old American song that says, accentuate the positive, eliminate the negative, and don't mess with Mr. In Between. So find a few positive ones, stay away from the negative ones, and don't even have to mess with the ones who aren't.
You know, I'll just share another story. There is a member of Ananda who lives at Ananda Village who at a very young age became very successful as a computer programmer with Microsoft. But he was a devotee, but nobody knew it. And he would go around to different conferences and he would talk about computer programming, just, you know, and people would come and he had some breakthrough products. And at one of these conferences, and he didn't talk about anything spiritual at all, just the thinking of how to do this. At one of these conferences, there was a young man who was a student at MIT, and he came up to him afterwards, this young MIT student, and he said, "Can we talk?" And the man, his name was Satyaki, said, "Yes." He said, may I take you out to dinner? And he said, "Yes." And he said, "You're into something, aren't you?" And he said, "What do you mean?" He said, "I could just tell." He said, "I'm starting to follow the spiritual path. I could just tell by how you presented, even computer programming, that you were in a spiritual path." They went and talked, and he didn't know about a master yet. He found, he led him. And that young man became very dedicated spiritually. And maybe you know the story, but this young man now is Dharmarajan, who leads the center in Chennai. But it was just because he was associating, talking about something very mundane, but he felt the vibration. So that's another thing you can do in a worldly environment. You don't need to talk about, as they say, don't wear your heart on your sleeve. You don't need to talk overtly, but just put out a vibration of high-mindedness, of dharma, of fairness, and that will create a vortex around you that will draw people that appreciate that as well. Okay, that was our one question.
One question.
And I think